When my husband's mistress walked into the St. Regency Hotel ballroom 6 months pregnant and announced he was the father, every eye in the room turned to watch my humiliation unfold. What none of them knew, including her, was that I was the cardiothoracic surgeon who had personally reviewed and approved his vasectomy procedure 18 months earlier. The medical records sitting in my hospital's database were about to transform my greatest embarrassment into his complete destruction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandeliers of the St. Regency Hotel cast prismatic light across 500 of Denver's most influential medical professionals, pharmaceutical executives, and healthcare philanthropists. The annual Colorado Medical Innovation Gala represented the pinnacle of our professional community's social calendar, an evening where groundbreaking research received recognition, generous donations funded tomorrow's treatments, and careers were built through strategic conversations over champagne and carefully plated courses. I stood near the silent auction tables displaying luxury vacation packages and exclusive wine collections, wearing an emerald silk gown that had required 3 months of saving from my surgical salary. My husband, Marcus Whitfield, was across the ballroom engaging in animated conversation with a group of investors from Apex Biotech, the pharmaceutical venture capital firm where he worked as a senior partner. His custom-tailored tuxedo fit him perfectly, and his confident gestures commanded attention from everyone in his circle. We had arrived separately due to my emergency surgery running late, planning to meet for the formal dinner service that would begin in 20 minutes. This was supposed to be my night of professional validation. Earlier in the week, I had received notification that Denver Metropolitan Hospital's Board of Directors had selected me as their nominee for the Pioneering Surgical Innovation Award, recognizing my development of a minimally invasive technique for repairing complex cardiac valve defects. At 38 years old, after 14 years of relentless dedication to cardiovascular surgery, after countless nights spent in operating rooms while colleagues went home to their families, after sacrificing social relationships and personal time in service of saving lives, I was finally receiving recognition that extended beyond my hospital's walls. Marcus had seemed genuinely proud when I shared the news, opening an expensive bottle of wine to celebrate and promising that the gala would be a night I would never forget. He had been attentive all week, bringing home flowers twice, suggesting we take a long weekend vacation after the event, mentioning how beautiful I would look in the dress I had selected. His affection had felt like the reconnection I had been craving after months of what seemed like natural distance that develops in long marriages. We had been married for 11 years, together for 13. We met at a medical industry conference in Chicago when I was a surgical resident drowning in student debt and exhaustion, and he was a young analyst at a healthcare investment firm with ambition that matched my own. Our courtship had been intense and consuming, built on shared understanding of demanding careers and mutual respect for each other's professional aspirations. Marriage had seemed like the natural progression of a partnership between two people who valued achievement and understood the sacrifices required to succeed in competitive fields. The early years had been good, or at least I remembered them as good. We supported each other through career transitions, celebrated promotions and successful deals, maintained separate professional identities while building a shared life. We purchased a house in Cherry Creek, the kind of address that signaled we had arrived in Denver's professional class. We attended events like this gala as a polished couple who represented success, who made partnership look effortless, even when the reality involved careful coordination of conflicting schedules. Children had been a discussion we kept postponing. I wanted to establish my surgical practice first, to achieve a level of professional security before taking parental leave in a field that viewed such interruptions as career liabilities. Marcus agreed or claimed to agree, saying he wanted to reach partner level at his firm before taking on parental responsibilities. The conversations became less frequent over the years until they stopped happening entirely, replaced by an unspoken understanding that perhaps we were not destined for parenthood. 18 months ago, Marcus had decided to undergo a vasectomy procedure. He presented the decision as practical and considerate, saying that he did not want me to endure hormonal contraception or more invasive female sterilization when a simple outpatient procedure could provide permanent birth control. I had appreciated what seemed like him taking responsibility for our shared decision to remain childless. As a physician, I reviewed the consent forms and post-procedure instructions, ensuring he understood the implications and permanence of the surgery. The procedure took place at Denver Surgical Associates, performed by Dr. Howard Chan, a urologist whose work I respected. Marcus recovered without complications, completed the required follow-up testing that confirmed the procedure's success, and we moved forward with our lives. The vasectomy had seemed like closing a door we had already decided not to walk through, formalizing a choice we had made together about the shape our life would take. I was examining a silent auction item offering a week at a Napa Valley vineyard estate, when I felt the atmospheric shift that occurs when something unexpected disrupts carefully orchestrated events. Conversations near me stopped mid-sentence. People turned toward the ballroom entrance with expressions mixing curiosity and shock. A woman's voice, clear and carrying despite the string quartet playing softly in the corner, cut through the ambient noise of 500 people gathered in formal evening wear. She stood just inside the ballroom entrance, backlit by the corridor lights in a way that made her appearance almost theatrical. She was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with long auburn hair styled in loose waves that cascaded over her shoulders. She wore a fitted cocktail dress in deep burgundy that accentuated her obviously pregnant figure. Her hand rested on her rounded belly in a gesture that could have been protective or performative. Her eyes scanned the ballroom with determined intensity until they locked onto a target across the room. The target was Marcus. I watched from my position near the silent auction tables as this pregnant stranger began walking directly toward my husband with purpose that suggested she knew exactly where she was going and what she intended to do. The crowd parted slightly, people stepping aside while maintaining their stares, creating a clear path between the entrance and the spot where Marcus stood frozen. His champagne flute suspended halfway to his lips, his face draining of color in a way that told me everything I needed to know before a single word was spoken. She stopped approximately 3 feet from him, close enough that their conversation would be public, far enough to address him without intimacy. Her voice carried across the suddenly silent ballroom with crystalline clarity that suggested either natural projection or intentional volume, designed for maximum audience impact. "Marcus Whitfield," she announced, her tone mixing accusation with something that sounded like righteous satisfaction. "I am tired of being your secret. I am tired of hiding while you play devoted husband at events like this. I am 6 months pregnant with your child, and I am done pretending you do not exist in my life while I do not exist in yours." The ballroom's silence became absolute. 500 people collectively held their breath. The string quartet's instruments went quiet mid-phrase. Servers holding trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres stopped moving. Every eye in the room focused on the tableau unfolding near the investor tables where Marcus had been confidently discussing biotech opportunities 30 seconds earlier. I felt my body respond before my mind fully processed what was happening. My heart rate accelerated. My hands went cold. My vision sharpened into hyperfocus the way it does during surgical crises when adrenaline floods the system and time seems to slow down. I watched Marcus's face cycle through shock, panic, and a desperate search for escape routes that did not exist when surrounded by witnesses. The investors he had been impressing moments earlier stepped back slightly, creating physical distance from someone who had suddenly become socially toxic. Their expressions showed varying degrees of discomfort, fascination, and second-hand embarrassment. One of them, a silver-haired man I recognized as the founder of a major venture capital fund, looked directly at me across the ballroom with something that might have been sympathy or might have been morbid curiosity about how the betrayed wife would respond. Marcus found his voice, though it came out strained and artificial. "Jessica, this is not the time or place for whatever you think you need to say. You are clearly confused or mistaken about something. I do not know what you hope to accomplish here, but I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself further." The woman, Jessica, apparently laughed without humor. Her hand remained on her pregnant belly, and I found myself noting clinical details through my shock. 6 months pregnant based on her size and the way she carried the weight. Healthy looking despite the obvious emotional distress. Young enough that pregnancy would typically proceed without significant complications. The physician part of my brain continued cataloging observations while the wife part struggled to accept what was unfolding. "Embarrass myself," Jessica repeated, her voice rising slightly. "I am 6 months pregnant with your baby, Marcus. I have text messages, emails, photographs of us together, receipts from the apartment you have been renting for me in Lodo. I have medical records listing you as the father. I have your promises that you were going to leave your wife, that we would be together, that you wanted this child we created." She turned slightly, scanning the crowd until her eyes found me standing near the silent auction tables. Her expression changed when our eyes met, transforming from righteous anger into something more complex. Recognition, perhaps, mixed with what might have been guilt or defiance or calculation. She had known I would be here. This confrontation was not spontaneous combustion, but rather carefully staged theater designed for maximum impact. "And there she is," Jessica continued, gesturing toward me in a way that drew every eye to my position. "The famous Dr. Whitfield, the brilliant surgeon who saves lives while her husband creates new ones with other women. Tell me, doctor, does it feel as humiliating standing there as Marcus promised me it would feel for him to finally leave you?" The cruelty of that particular detail, the image of Marcus discussing my humiliation with his pregnant mistress, cut deeper than the infidelity itself. They had talked about me, laughed about me perhaps, planned this moment when my professional triumph would be overshadowed by personal devastation. The gala that was supposed to celebrate my surgical innovation had become the stage for my public destruction. I walked toward them both with measured steps, my training in remaining composed during medical emergencies serving me well in social catastrophe. People moved aside as I approached, their expressions ranging from pity to fascination to the particular discomfort people feel when witnessing someone else's private pain become public spectacle. I stopped beside Marcus, close enough to present a united front despite the chasm that had just opened between us. Up close, Jessica looked younger than I initially estimated, perhaps 25 at most. Her makeup was carefully applied, her dress expensive despite her claim of being financially dependent on Marcus. Her pregnancy was undeniable, her belly round and prominent in a way that suggested she was indeed approximately 6 months along based on standard gestational development. The physician in me, trained to observe and analyze, noted details automatically. Her skin showed the slight edema common in second trimester pregnancy. Her posture suggested mild lower back discomfort typical of carrying extra frontal weight. Her breathing was slightly elevated, consistent with both emotional agitation and the increased cardiovascular demands of pregnancy. Every visible sign supported her claim of being in her second trimester, except for one impossible detail that she could not have known, that Marcus apparently had not told her, that was about to transform this humiliating confrontation into something else entirely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time since this nightmare began. His face was pale, his expression cycling between panic and desperate calculation. He was trying to formulate a response that would minimize the damage, trying to find words that would make this situation somehow manageable. His eyes met mine briefly before he looked away, unable to hold my gaze, confirming his guilt more definitively than any confession could. Then I looked at Jessica, this young woman who believed she was carrying my husband's child, who had staged this dramatic revelation at the most public possible moment, who stood there radiating righteous triumph while resting her hand protectively on her pregnant belly. I spoke clearly and calmly, my surgical training allowing me to maintain professional composure, even as my personal life disintegrated. My voice carried across the silent ballroom without requiring me to raise it, 500 people straining to hear every word. "When exactly did you conceive this baby, Jessica? What date did you and Marcus begin your relationship?" She blinked at the unexpected question, her righteous momentum disrupted by having to provide specific timeline details. Her hand remained on her belly, and I watched her calculate whether answering would somehow undermine her dramatic revelation. "We have been together for 14 months, she said finally. "I became pregnant approximately 6.5 months ago. The baby is due in early March. Why does that matter when your husband has been cheating on you and is about to become a father to my child?" I felt something shift inside me, grief and rage transforming into cold clarity. The physician in me took control, the part of myself that dealt in facts and evidence and medical certainty rather than emotional devastation. "It matters," I said quietly, "because Marcus underwent a vasectomy procedure 18 months ago." I reviewed the consent forms myself. Dr. Howard Chun performed the surgery at Denver Surgical Associates on August 15 of last year. Marcus completed all required follow-up testing that confirmed the procedure's success. His sperm count results from October showed complete absence of viable sperm. The medical documentation is comprehensive and conclusive. I paused, letting that information settle over the ballroom, watching Jessica's expression shift from triumph to confusion to the beginning of something that looked like panic. Which means I continued in the same calm professional tone I use when delivering difficult diagnoses to patients, that either you are lying about Marcus being the father of your child, or you genuinely believe he is the father because he lied to you about his fertility status while having unprotected sex with you. Either scenario suggests you might want to reconsider the dramatic claims you are making in front of 500 witnesses. The silence that followed my statement was different from the breathless attention that had characterized the previous confrontation. This silence contained shock, confusion, and the collective mental recalculation of 500 people who had just watched the narrative they were observing completely invert. Jessica's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to something that looked like the first glimmers of doubt. Her hand remained on her belly, but the gesture now seemed less protective and more uncertain. She looked at Marcus with an expression that demanded explanation, confirmation, some response that would make sense of what she had just heard. Marcus said nothing. His silence in that moment told its own story, confirmed the truth of my statement more definitively than any words could. He stood there in his expensive tuxedo, surrounded by colleagues and investors who were watching his professional and personal credibility evaporate in real time, unable to formulate any response that would make this situation less catastrophic. "You had a vasectomy," Jessica said slowly, her voice losing the confident projection it had carried moments earlier. "You told me you could not have children with your wife because she was infertile. You told me she refused to do fertility treatments. You said you wanted a family but she was too focused on her career to give you one." I felt that particular betrayal like a physical blow. He had blamed me to his mistress, constructed a narrative where I was the obstacle to his paternal desires, painted himself as the victim of my professional ambitions. The cruelty of using my surgical career, the work I loved and excelled at, as justification for his infidelity added another layer to the devastation. Before I could respond, Dr. Howard Chun himself appeared beside us. He had been attending the gala as one of the evening's honored guests, and he must have heard enough of the conversation to understand what was being discussed. His presence was both professional support and walking verification of the medical facts I had just presented. "Dr. Whitfield is correct," Dr. Chun said in his characteristically measured tone. "I performed Mr. Whitfield's vasectomy procedure on the date she mentioned. The surgery was successful and all follow-up testing confirmed complete absence of viable sperm. The medical records are definitive. Mr. Whitfield is sterile and has been for approximately 18 months. Jessica's legs seemed to weaken slightly. Someone, one of the gala organizers perhaps, quickly brought a chair and she sat down heavily, her hand still on her belly, her expression showing the dawning realization that the dramatic revelation she had planned had just backfired spectacularly. The ballroom remained frozen in this tableau for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Then the murmuring began, quiet conversations between attendees processing what they had just witnessed, the social machinery of gossip and judgment beginning to turn. I could feel the narrative shifting in real time, my humiliation transforming into something else, though I was still too shocked to fully process what any of this meant. Marcus finally found his voice. His words came out defensive and desperate, the tone of someone drowning and grasping for anything that might keep him afloat. "This is a private matter that should not be discussed here. Jessica is clearly confused or has been misled by someone else regarding her pregnancy. I have done nothing wrong. My marriage to my wife is our business alone, and I will not stand here and be accused of impropriety based on the delusions of someone who has clearly become unstable." The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. He was attempting to reframe Jessica as mentally unstable, to dismiss her pregnancy claim entirely, to position himself as the victim of false accusations. He had apparently forgotten that 500 people had just watched her produce specific details about their relationship, that his own panicked reaction had confirmed the affair even before the paternity question became relevant. I felt something crystallize inside me in that moment, something cold and clear and absolutely certain. I was standing in a ballroom wearing a dress I had saved for months to afford, At a gala celebrating my professional achievement, watching my husband lie to 500 witnesses after his pregnant mistress had just exposed his infidelity. The life I had built with Marcus, the partnership I had believed in, the future I had imagined, all of it was dissolving in real time. But I was also standing there as a cardiothoracic surgeon who had spent 14 years developing expertise and earning respect. I was Dr. Whitfield, the physician who had developed innovative surgical techniques that saved lives. I was the woman who had been nominated for the Pioneering Surgical Innovation Award, based on merit and excellence. Marcus's betrayal could destroy my marriage, but it could not destroy who I fundamentally was or what I had accomplished. I looked at Jessica, this young woman who had been lied to and used, who had believed promises that were never going to be kept, who was pregnant with a child that could not biologically be Marcus's despite what she had been told. Despite my anger at her dramatic confrontation, despite the humiliation she had caused, I recognized that she was also a victim of Marcus's deception. Then I looked at Marcus, this man I had loved and trusted for 13 years, who had been planning to leave me according to his mistress, who had lied to both of us in different ways, who stood there trying to manipulate the narrative even as it crumbled around him. When I spoke, my voice was steady and clear, carrying across the ballroom with surgical precision. I think we are finished here, Marcus. You should leave this event immediately. I will be staying for the dinner service and award presentations. When I return home later this evening, I expect you to be gone. Take whatever you need for an extended stay elsewhere because you will not be living in our home after tonight. My attorney will contact you on Monday morning to discuss divorce proceedings. I turned to Jessica, who was still sitting in the chair someone had provided, her expression showing shock that might have been at my words or might have been at the realization that Marcus had lied to her about his fertility. As for you, I suggest you contact the actual father of your child, whoever that might be, and inform him of his responsibilities. You should also probably consult with an attorney about what recourse you might have against Marcus for misrepresenting his fertility status during your relationship. I believe there are legal implications to deliberately lying about being sterile, while having unprotected sex with someone. Then I walked away from both of them, walking back toward the silent auction tables where I had been standing before this nightmare began. The crowd parted to let me pass, and I could feel 500 pairs of eyes watching my exit from the confrontation. I held my head high and kept my pace measured, refusing to run or show the complete internal collapse I was experiencing. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the chief of surgery at Denver Metropolitan Hospital and my mentor for the past 6 years, appeared beside me as if materializing from nowhere. She placed a gentle hand on my elbow and guided me toward a private alcove away from the main ballroom. You need a moment, she said quietly. Take as much time as you need. I will make sure no one disturbs you. The kindness in her voice, the recognition that I was not as composed as I appeared, threatened to break through the professional facade I was maintaining. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and let her guide me to a small service corridor where I could breathe without 500 people analyzing my every expression. I stood there in that corridor, my back against the wall, my emerald silk gown suddenly feeling like costume rather than celebration. The sounds of the gala continued beyond the door, muted conversations and clinking glasses, and the string quartet resuming their performance. Life was continuing as though the entire foundation of my world had not just shattered. My mind was trying to process multiple catastrophes simultaneously. My husband had been having an affair for over a year. His mistress was pregnant, though apparently not with his child given the medical impossibility. He had told her he was leaving me. He had blamed my career for his desire to find fulfillment elsewhere. He had lied to both of us in profound and calculated ways. Our entire marriage, or at least the last 18 months of it, had been a performance he was conducting while building a completely separate life. And all of this had been revealed at the most public possible moment, at an event celebrating my professional achievement, in front of colleagues and peers and hospital administrators whose respect I valued. The humiliation was comprehensive and inescapable. But underneath the humiliation and heartbreak, something else was beginning to surface. Anger, yes, but more than that. A cold clarity about exactly who Marcus was and what he had done. A recognition that the man I thought I knew had never actually existed. That I had been married to a carefully constructed fiction designed to serve his needs while providing cover for his duplicity. The vasectomy detail kept circulating in my mind. He had undergone permanent sterilization while telling his mistress that I was the infertile one, that I refused to have children with him. The calculated cruelty of that lie suggested someone capable of sustained deception at a level I had never imagined. How many other lies had there been? How much of our marriage had been real versus performance? I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened my contacts. I needed to call someone, needed to ground myself in reality, needed to start taking concrete steps toward whatever came next. My finger hovered over my best friend's name before I remembered she was at a medical conference in Boston this week. My parents lived in Phoenix and would be asleep. My colleagues were all here at the gala watching my marriage implode in real time. Instead, I opened my browser and searched for divorce attorneys in Denver, the clinical physician part of my brain taking over when the emotional part threatened to overwhelm me completely. I bookmarked 3 highly rated firms, noting their areas of specialization and client reviews. Monday morning I would make calls. Monday morning I would begin the formal process of dismantling my marriage. But tonight, I had to get through the rest of this gala with whatever dignity I could salvage. Dr. Morrison knocked softly on the corridor door before entering. She carried 2 glasses of champagne and offered one to me with an expression that suggested she understood this was medicinal rather than celebratory. "The dinner service is beginning soon," she said gently. "You do not have to attend if you need to leave. Everyone would understand. But if you choose to stay, I will sit beside you and we will get through this evening together." I took the champagne and drank half of it in one long swallow, feeling the bubbles burn down my throat. Stay or leave. Run or stand my ground. Let Marcus's betrayal drive me from my professional triumph or refuse to let his actions define this night that was supposed to celebrate my achievements. I thought about Jessica sitting in that ballroom chair, her hand on her pregnant belly, realizing that the man she thought she knew had lied to her about something as fundamental as his fertility. I thought about Marcus trying to gaslight 500 witnesses into doubting what they had clearly seen and heard. I thought about all the times over the past 14 months when he had come home late, when he had been distracted during conversations, when he had suggested I was being paranoid about his increasing distance. And then I thought about the Pioneering Surgical Innovation Award, about the recognition of work I had done in operating rooms while Marcus was building his double life, about the patients whose lives had been saved by techniques I developed through years of dedicated practice. "I am staying," I told Dr. Morrison, hearing the steel in my own voice. "I am staying for the entire event. I am accepting my award nomination with grace. And I am showing everyone in that ballroom that Marcus Whitfield's betrayal cannot destroy what I have built through my own excellence." Dr. Morrison smiled, the expression fierce with approval and support. "Then let us go remind 500 people why you earned that nomination based on merit while your soon-to-be ex-husband was busy lying to everyone in his life." We walked back into the ballroom together just as the dinner service began. I held my head high and walked to my assigned table near the front of the room, where placard with my name sat beside an empty chair that Marcus would never fill. People watched me sit down, watched me smooth my dress and pick up my menu with hands that barely trembled, watched me transform private devastation into public composure. And somewhere in that moment, between the shock and the grief and the humiliation, I felt the first stirring of something that would eventually become determination. Marcus had tried to erase me from his narrative, had planned to leave me for a younger woman while blaming me for his choices. But I was Dr. Whitfield and I had survived 14 years of surgical residency, countless emergency operations, and building a career in a field that did not always welcome women. I would survive this too. And eventually I would do more than survive. I would ensure that Marcus Whitfield understood exactly who he had betrayed and exactly what that betrayal would cost him. The dinner service proceeded with surreal normalcy considering that my marriage had just disintegrated in front of Denver's entire medical community. Servers presented courses with practiced efficiency, while 500 people tried to pretend they had not just witnessed spectacular personal devastation. Conversations at nearby tables maintained carefully lowered volumes, though I could feel the weight of sidelong glances and whispered speculation about what would happen next. I sat at my assigned table near the front of the ballroom, flanked by Dr. Patricia Morrison on my left and Dr. James Chan, the head of our hospital's cardiac catheterization lab, on my right. Both maintained protective presences without forcing conversation, allowing me the space to process while ensuring I was not isolated in my humiliation. The empty chair beside me where Marcus should have been sitting announced his absence like a neon sign broadcasting marital failure. My phone vibrated continuously in my evening clutch throughout the first course. A delicate butternut squash soup that I mechanically spooned into my mouth without tasting. I ignored the notifications, knowing they represented the beginning of what would become an avalanche of messages from colleagues, friends, acquaintances, and probably strangers who had witnessed the Gala confrontation or heard about it through the rapid-fire gossip networks that characterize any professional community. The main course arrived as the Gala's master of ceremonies began introducing the evening's award presentations. Herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables arranged in artistic patterns that probably represented hours of kitchen preparation. I cut the fish into small pieces and moved them around my plate, creating the appearance of eating while my stomach churned with emotions I was working desperately to contain until I could escape to privacy. Dr. Morrison leaned toward me during a lull in the presentations, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You do not have to stay for your award presentation if this is too much. I can accept on your behalf and explain that you had a medical emergency. No one would question it." I appreciated the escape route she was offering. The professional cover story that would allow me to flee without admitting that personal catastrophe had driven me away from my moment of recognition. For a long moment I considered accepting, imagined walking out of the ballroom and driving home to begin the private grieving process away from hundreds of watching eyes. But then I thought about Marcus, who had presumably left the gala immediately after my dismissal, who was probably already constructing whatever narrative would best serve his interests, who would undoubtedly frame himself as the victim of an unstable wife who had caused a public scene. The thought of giving him that satisfaction, of allowing his betrayal to drive me away from professional recognition I had legitimately earned, triggered something stubborn and fierce inside me. "I am staying," I told Dr. Morrison quietly but firmly. "He does not get to take this from me too." She nodded with an expression that suggested she had expected exactly that response and approved completely. "Then we will sit here together and watch you accept the recognition you have earned through excellence that has nothing to do with the failure of your marriage." The Pioneering Surgical Innovation Award was announced during the dessert course, a chocolate torte with raspberry coulis that sat untouched before me. The Master of Ceremonies, a prominent cardiologist from University Hospital, spoke about the significance of advancing surgical techniques and the courage required to challenge established methods in favor of better patient outcomes. When he announced my name as this year's recipient, the applause that filled the ballroom carried undertones I had never anticipated for this moment. There was genuine recognition of my professional achievement, certainly, but also sympathy for the personal humiliation I had just endured and perhaps admiration for the composure I was somehow maintaining. The standing ovation felt less like celebration, and more like collective acknowledgement of surviving catastrophe with dignity. I walked to the podium on legs that felt disconnected from my body, my emerald gown flowing behind me, my face arranged in an expression of gracious professionalism that required every ounce of control I possessed. The crystal award was heavy in my hands when the Master of Ceremonies presented it. The engraved text reading Dr. Alexandra Whitfield, Pioneering Surgical Innovation Award, Denver Medical Community. My name, my achievement, permanent recognition that existed independent of anything Marcus had done or failed to do. My acceptance speech had been prepared weeks ago, carefully crafted remarks about the importance of questioning conventional approaches and the collaborative nature of surgical innovation. I had practiced the delivery multiple times, timing it to stay within the recommended 3-minute limit, while touching on key themes of perseverance and dedication to patient care. Standing at that podium, looking out at 500 faces that had witnessed my professional triumph and personal devastation within the same hour, I made a decision to speak from truth rather than prepared remarks. "Thank you for this tremendous honor," I began, my voice steady despite the emotional turbulence beneath the surface. When I entered cardiovascular surgery 14 years ago, I did so because I believed that medicine should constantly evolve toward better outcomes for patients. I believed that established methods, while proven and comfortable, should always be questioned if there is potential for improvement. I believed that the courage to challenge convention was essential to advancement. I paused, letting those words settle while I gathered my thoughts for what I wanted to say next. The ballroom was completely silent, 500 people leaning forward slightly in their chairs, sensing that this would be more than a standard acceptance speech. Tonight has tested my own courage in ways I did not anticipate when I walked into this beautiful ballroom several hours ago. I have been reminded that sometimes the conventions we need to challenge are not just surgical techniques, but also the personal compromises we make in pursuit of professional success. I have learned that excellence in one area of life does not insulate us from failure in another, and that the same dedication that makes us exceptional physicians can sometimes blind us to deteriorating relationships. I saw Dr. Morrison's expression shift to concern, probably worried that I was about to have an emotional breakdown at the podium in front of the entire medical community. But I felt strangely calm, as though speaking these truths publicly was somehow essential to processing them privately. However, I have also been reminded tonight that our worth is not determined by those who betray us but rather by the work we do, and the lives we impact through that work. The surgical techniques I have developed exist independent of my personal life. The patients whose outcomes improved because of those techniques are not diminished by my marital failure. The research I have contributed to cardiovascular medicine stands on its own merit regardless of what happened in this ballroom earlier this evening. The applause that interrupted my speech was spontaneous and sustained, led by Dr. Morrison and quickly joined by the entire audience. It felt less like approval of my words and more like collective recognition of the courage required to acknowledge personal devastation while claiming professional achievement. Several people in the front rows had tears in their eyes, moved perhaps by the vulnerability I was showing, or by recognition of their own struggles to balance professional excellence with personal happiness. When the applause subsided, I continued with renewed clarity about what I wanted to communicate. So I accept this award with gratitude for the recognition, and with renewed commitment to the work that defines me more accurately than any relationship ever could. I accept it as Dr. Whitfield, as a surgeon who has spent 14 years developing expertise that saves lives, as a physician who believes that questioning convention leads to better outcomes, and as a woman who is learning right now that sometimes the most important conventions to challenge are the ones we impose on ourselves about what we should tolerate in our personal lives. I lifted the crystal award slightly, letting the chandelier light refract through it. Thank you for this honor. Thank you for your support. And thank you for reminding me tonight that professional excellence and personal dignity are achievements we build ourselves, not gifts we receive from others who can take them away on a whim. The standing ovation that followed was different from the first one. This was not sympathy or awkward acknowledgement of uncomfortable circumstances, but rather genuine appreciation for honesty and resilience. I walked back to my table carrying the award that represented years of dedicated work, feeling simultaneously devastated and strangely liberated. Dr. Morrison embraced me when I reached my seat, her hug fierce and brief. "That was the bravest thing I have seen in 20 years of medicine," she whispered. "You just showed 500 people what real strength looks like." The gala concluded shortly after the final award presentations. People began filtering out of the ballroom in small groups, many casting glances toward my table as they passed. Some approached to offer congratulations on the award with carefully neutral expressions that avoided mentioning the earlier confrontation. Others simply nodded respectfully as they walked by, their acknowledgement conveying support without forcing conversation I was not equipped to handle. Jessica, Marcus's pregnant mistress, had disappeared at some point during the dinner service. I had not noticed her leaving, had been too focused on maintaining composure to track her movements. Part of me wondered what she was feeling right now, whether she had contacted the actual father of her child, or whether she was still processing the revelation that Marcus had lied about his fertility. Despite the humiliation she had caused me, I recognized that she was also a victim of his deception, manipulated and used for purposes she probably did not fully understand. Dr. Chan offered to walk me to my car when the ballroom had mostly emptied. The valet retrieved my vehicle, a practical sedan that reflected my priorities of reliability over status, and I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes before starting the engine. The Crystal Award sat in the passenger seat, catching light from the hotel's exterior illumination, a tangible reminder that this night had contained both triumph and catastrophe. The drive home to our house in Cherry Creek took 20 minutes through Denver's late evening traffic. I used the time to call my best friend, Dr. Sarah Brennan, despite knowing she was at a medical conference in Boston. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with the assumption that I was calling to share happy news about the award ceremony. "Congratulations on the Pioneering Award. I saw the announcement on the Medical Society's social media. How does it feel to be officially recognized as brilliant? Marcus brought his pregnant mistress to the gala, I said without preamble, my voice flat and emotionless from exhaustion. She announced in front of 500 people that he is the father of her child. Except he had a vasectomy 18 months ago that I reviewed the paperwork for, so either she is lying about paternity or he lied to her about his fertility while having unprotected sex with her. The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds. Then Sarah's voice came back, now stripped of warmth and filled with cold fury. Tell me you are joking. Tell me this is some kind of terrible hypothetical scenario you are testing my reaction to. I wish I were joking. I provided her with a condensed version of the evening's events, from Jessica's dramatic entrance through my acceptance speech. Hearing my own voice describe the catastrophe as though it had happened to someone else. The clinical detachment I was maintaining felt necessary for functioning but also vaguely concerning, as though I was treating my own emotional trauma with the same professional distance I applied to patient cases. Where are you right now? Sarah asked when I finished the summary. Are you safe? Do you need me to fly back tonight? I am driving home to pack Marcus's belongings and change the locks. I am safe in the sense that I am not in physical danger, though I am probably not in great emotional condition. You do not need to fly back tonight. Finish your conference. I will still be dealing with this disaster when you return. Alex, you should not be alone right now. Call someone. Call Patricia Morrison or your brother or literally anyone who can sit with you while you process this. Do not try to handle this by yourself. I promised I would consider calling someone, ended the conversation, and immediately ignored my own promise. The thought of explaining this situation to another person, of seeing sympathy or pity in their eyes, felt unbearable. I needed to move through the immediate practical steps of dismantling my marriage before I could afford the luxury of emotional processing. The house was dark when I arrived, Marcus's car absent from the driveway. He had apparently taken my directive to leave seriously, or at least seriously enough to not be present when I came home. I entered through the front door and stood in the foyer of the house we had purchased together 6 years ago, looking at the carefully decorated space that had represented our joint success and partnership. Everything looked exactly as it had when I left for the gala 6 hours earlier. The living room furniture we had selected together during a weekend shopping trip. The artwork we had purchased from a gallery in Santa Fe during a vacation that felt like a lifetime ago. The photographs on the mantel showing us at various professional events and personal celebrations, smiling and appearing happy in that way that photographs preserved moments without context. I walked through the house methodically, cataloging what was missing and what remained. Marcus had taken his laptop, his phone charger, some clothes from the closet, and his toiletries from the bathroom. He had left behind most of his possessions, either because he was planning to return for them later, or because he had other clothes and necessities wherever he had been staying during his double life. The master bedroom felt contaminated somehow, as though the bed we had shared carried the stain of his betrayal. I wondered how many nights he had lain beside me planning his escape, how many mornings he had woken up next to me while thinking about his pregnant mistress. The mundane intimacies of marriage, the casual touches and routine conversations, all of it reframed as performance rather than genuine connection. I changed out of my evening gown and into comfortable clothes, then began the practical work of separating our lives. I moved through the house with surgical precision, gathering Marcus's belongings into boxes and suitcases that I lined up in the garage. Clothes, personal items, books, the expensive watch I had given him for our 10th anniversary. Everything that was solely his got packed away, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm that had opened between us. My phone continued vibrating with incoming messages throughout this process. Texts from colleagues who had attended the gala. Emails from professional acquaintances offering support. Voicemails from friends who had heard about the confrontation through social media or gossip networks. I ignored all of it, maintaining the clinical detachment that was allowing me to function through immediate necessities. Around 2 in the morning, I found the documents in Marcus's home office that revealed the full scope of his double life. Bank statements showing regular transfers to an account I did not recognize. Rental agreements for an apartment in lower downtown Denver that he had signed 8 months ago. Credit card receipts from expensive restaurants and jewelry stores, documenting a romance with Jessica that had apparently involved considerable financial investment. The most devastating discovery was a folder on his computer labeled future plans that contained detailed financial projections for his life with Jessica. He had calculated what divorce would cost him, what child support obligations he would face if Jessica's baby were actually his, what his income would support in terms of lifestyle if he were maintaining 2 households. The clinical calculation of it, the spreadsheet analysis of abandoning his wife, demonstrated a level of premeditation that transformed betrayal into something more systematic and cruel. I photographed every document with my phone, creating digital records that my attorney would need for divorce proceedings. The physician in me recognized that I was gathering evidence with the same methodical thoroughness I applied to documenting patient cases, treating the dissolution of my marriage as a medical file that required comprehensive documentation. At 3 a.m, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. I sat on the couch in the living room, still wearing the comfortable clothes I had changed into, and let the grief and rage and humiliation crash over me without the professional facade I had maintained at the gala and during the practical work of separation. The tears came hard and painful, shaking my entire body with the force of emotions I had been containing for hours. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, for the partnership I believed was real, for the future I had imagined that would never exist. I cried for my own blindness to signs I should have recognized, for the nights I worked late at the hospital while Marcus was building his alternative life, for the conversations we never had about growing distance because I was too focused on surgical innovation to notice my marriage was dying. But underneath the grief, something else was building. Anger at Marcus for his calculated betrayal. Fury at Jessica for choosing to humiliate me publicly rather than confronting him privately. Rage at myself for being so focused on professional achievement that I missed obvious signs of a husband planning his escape. And beneath even the anger, something colder and more determined. Recognition that Marcus had underestimated me, had assumed I would be destroyed by his betrayal and accept whatever settlement he offered. He had clearly not anticipated that I would be the physician who reviewed his vasectomy paperwork, that I would have immediate access to medical records that proved his mistress's baby could not be his, that I would transform his dramatic revelation into evidence of his dishonesty to both the women in his life. I made a list on my phone as dawn began lighting the windows, organizing my thoughts into actionable steps. Contact divorce attorneys Monday morning. Document all evidence of Marcus's affair and financial deception. Secure my own finances and protect my assets. Consult with the hospital's legal department about any professional implications. Change locks on the house. Cancel shared credit cards. Separate all joint accounts. Each item on the list represented a piece of the dismantling process, the systematic destruction of a marriage that had apparently been fiction for longer than I wanted to acknowledge. The clinical approach felt appropriate somehow, treating divorce as a procedure that required careful planning and precise execution. My phone buzzed with an incoming text message at 5:30 in the morning. Marcus, finally breaking his silence with words that appeared on my screen with stunning inadequacy. Alex, we need to talk about what happened. Jessica was confused and made assumptions that were not accurate. I never cheated on you. She is someone I knew professionally who became obsessed and created a fantasy relationship that did not exist. I am staying at a hotel tonight, but I will come home tomorrow so we can discuss this rationally and resolve the misunderstanding. The audacity of the gaslighting was almost impressive in its completeness. He was attempting to reframe documented infidelity as a confused woman's fantasy, to position himself as the victim of Jessica's delusions, rather than the architect of betrayal. He apparently believed I would accept this narrative despite having seen his financial records, his rental agreement for her apartment, his detailed planning documents for their future together. I typed a response with hands that were steady despite the rage coursing through me. Do not come to the house tomorrow or any day. Your belongings are packed in the garage and I am changing the locks. My attorney will contact you Monday morning to begin divorce proceedings. Any future communication should go through legal counsel. You are not welcome in my home or my life. His response came back within seconds. You are being irrational and emotional. We have been married for 11 years. You cannot just end our relationship because you believed the lies of an unstable woman who created a false narrative. I deserve the chance to explain and defend myself. I am coming home tomorrow whether you like it or not because it is my house too. I forwarded his messages to my phone's notes app for documentation, then blocked his number entirely. The satisfaction of that small act of control, of refusing him access to me even through text messages, provided the first moment of empowerment I had felt since the Gala confrontation. At 6 in the morning, I called a 24-hour locksmith and paid premium rates for immediate service. By 7, new locks were installed on every entrance to the house and Marcus's keys would no longer provide access. By 8, I had contacted my bank and canceled all joint credit cards, opened new accounts in my name only, and transferred my salary deposits to financial institutions he had no connection to. By 9, I had showered, dressed in professional clothes despite it being Saturday, and driven to the hospital to complete paperwork I had been avoiding all week. The physical space of the hospital felt safe somehow, familiar territory where I was Dr. Whitfield rather than the betrayed wife who had become Denver's most gossiped about dinner conversation. Dr. Morrison found me in my office at the hospital around 10 in the morning, her expression combining concern with the no-nonsense directness that characterized her leadership style. "You should not be here on your day off, especially after last night. You should be at home processing or with friends grieving or doing literally anything except pretending to work." I am not pretending. I have patient charts to review and surgical schedules to coordinate. Work is the only thing that makes sense right now. Everything else in my life is chaos, but in this hospital I know exactly who I am and what I am supposed to do. She sat down across from my desk, studying me with the assessing gaze she used when evaluating residents. "Alex, you gave an incredible speech last night. You showed strength that most people could not manage under those circumstances. But you do not have to maintain that strength every moment. You are allowed to fall apart sometimes. I will fall apart when the practical necessities are handled. Right now I need to focus on the steps that will protect me legally and financially from whatever Marcus tries to do next. Falling apart is a luxury I cannot afford until I have secured my position." Dr. Morrison nodded slowly, recognizing the coping mechanism I was employing. "Just remember that strength includes knowing when to ask for help. You have colleagues and friends who want to support you. Do not isolate yourself because you think you should be able to handle everything alone." After she left, I returned to reviewing patient charts with focus that felt almost manic in its intensity. Work had always been my refuge during difficult periods, the space where problems had solutions and expertise mattered. The operating room was the one place where I felt completely competent and in control, where outcomes depended on skill and knowledge rather than on whether the people you trusted were systematically betraying you. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number around noon. I answered automatically, assuming it was hospital-related, and found myself speaking with Jessica, Marcus's pregnant mistress whose dramatic revelation had destroyed my marriage 12 hours earlier. "Dr. Whitfield, I know you probably do not want to talk to me. I know I humiliated you publicly and I am sorry for that. But I need to know if what you said about the vasectomy is true. I need to know if Marcus really cannot be the father of my baby." Her voice carried desperation that overcame whatever anger I felt about her role in last night's catastrophe. I responded with clinical detachment, falling back on physician training. "The vasectomy was performed 18 months ago by Dr. Howard Chun at Denver Surgical Associates. Post-procedure testing confirmed complete absence of viable sperm. The medical records are definitive. Marcus Whitfield is sterile and has been since that procedure." The sound on the other end of the line might have been a sob or simply sharp intake of breath. "He told me his wife was infertile. He told me you refused fertility treatments. He said he wanted a family but you were too focused on your career. He said when I got pregnant that he was thrilled, that this was the family he had always wanted, that he was going to leave you and we would be together." I felt an unwelcome surge of sympathy for this young woman who had believed promises that were never going to be kept. "How long have you known Marcus? When did your relationship begin?" 14 months ago. We met at a pharmaceutical industry conference where I was working as an event coordinator. He pursued me intensely, said he had been unhappy in his marriage for years, said he was staying with you out of obligation but wanted more from life. I believed him. I believed everything he said. "Did he know you were pregnant before last night?" Of course he knew. We have been planning for this baby together. He helped me decorate the nursery at the apartment he rented for me. He came to ultrasound appointments. He talked about names and schools and what kind of father he wanted to be. And now you are telling me none of it was real, that the baby cannot even be his, that he lied about something so fundamental. I closed my eyes, processing the scope of Marcus's deception. He had not just lied about his fertility but had actively participated in planning for a child he knew could not be his, had attended medical appointments and decorated nurseries while knowing the entire premise was false. The level of calculated dishonesty required to maintain that performance suggested someone I had never actually known despite 11 years of marriage. Jessica, you need to contact the biological father of your child immediately. Whoever you were involved with around the time of conception needs to know about the pregnancy and his responsibilities. You also need to consult with an attorney about what legal recourse you might have against Marcus for misrepresenting his fertility status during your relationship. What about you? What are you going to do? I am going to divorce him, protect my assets, and ensure he cannot manipulate anyone else the way he manipulated both of us. Beyond that, I am going to continue being an excellent surgeon and building a life that has nothing to do with Marcus Whitfield or his destruction. After ending the call with Jessica, I sat in my office looking out at the Denver skyline and felt the stirring of something that went beyond anger or grief. Determination crystallized into purpose. Marcus had betrayed me systematically and completely, had lied to multiple women while maintaining elaborate performances of devotion. He had underestimated both Jessica and me, had assumed we would never compare notes or challenge his narratives. He was about to learn exactly how wrong that assumption was, and he was about to discover that destroying a cardiothoracic surgeon's marriage came with consequences he had not anticipated when he planned his dramatic exit. I was Dr. Alexandra Whitfield, award-winning physician with 14 years of building professional excellence that existed independent of any relationship. Marcus's betrayal had broken my heart, but it had not broken me. And that distinction was going to matter more than he could possibly imagine. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that Denver experiences in late October. The air sharp and clean after weekend rain had washed the city streets. I woke at 5:30 after managing approximately 3 hours of fragmented sleep, my mind already cataloging the tasks that required immediate attention. The weekend had passed in a blur of practical necessities, document organization, and the strange suspension of normal life that occurs when catastrophe disrupts established routines. I had spent Sunday methodically photographing every relevant document I discovered in Marcus's home office, creating comprehensive digital records of his financial deception, and planning for his alternative life with Jessica. Bank statements showing regular transfers to accounts I had never known existed. Credit card receipts documenting an elaborate courtship that had apparently involved expensive dinners, jewelry purchases, and weekend trips I had assumed were business travel. Rental agreements for the apartment in lower downtown Denver where he had been maintaining his second life while coming home to me and performing the role of devoted husband. The most damning evidence remained the folder labeled Future Plans on his computer, containing detailed financial projections for divorce settlement scenarios. He had calculated various outcomes based on different asset division strategies, had estimated what my surgical income could be forced to contribute in spousal support, had even researched whether Colorado law would allow him to claim a portion of my future earning potential based on supporting my career during our marriage. The clinical calculation of abandonment, reduced to spreadsheet analysis and financial optimization, demonstrated premeditation that transformed betrayal from emotional weakness into systematic exploitation. I had also spent considerable time Sunday researching divorce attorneys who specialized in high-asset professional divorces, reading client reviews and case summaries, identifying legal representation that would protect my interests against someone who had clearly been planning his exit strategy for months if not longer. The 3 firms I had bookmarked Saturday night had expanded to a short list of 7 after deeper investigation into their track records with complex financial cases involving professional spouses. By 6 in the morning Monday, I was showered, dressed in one of my professional suits that signaled competence rather than vulnerability, and reviewing my notes about which attorneys to contact first. My surgical schedule for the day was light by design, with only one procedure scheduled for late afternoon, and the rest of my time allocated to administrative work and patient consultations. I had deliberately kept Mondays less intensive to allow for the inevitable complications that arose over weekends, but today the lighter schedule would serve a different purpose entirely. The first call I placed at precisely 8 o'clock went to Morrison & Associates, a family law firm that specialized in representing high-earning women in divorce proceedings. Their website emphasized protecting professional women's assets from spouses who had benefited from their success, and their case results suggested aggressive competence that appealed to my current state of cold determination. The receptionist who answered was professionally pleasant, taking my basic information and explaining that attorney consultations typically required scheduling several days in advance due to high demand. However, when I mentioned my name and she apparently recognized it from weekend gossip about the Gala confrontation, her tone shifted into something more accommodating. "Dr. Whitfield, let me check if Attorney Morrison has any availability today. This is regarding the situation at the medical gala Saturday evening, I assume." She placed me on hold before I could respond, and I sat in my hospital office listening to classical music for approximately 2 minutes before a different voice came on the line. "Dr. Whitfield, this is Catherine Morrison. I heard about what happened at the gala and I have been expecting your call. I can meet with you this morning at 10 if that works with your schedule. I believe we should begin building your case immediately given the public nature of the situation and the likelihood that your husband is currently consulting his own legal representation." Her directness and immediate availability suggested either exceptional client service or recognition that my case carried both urgency and the potential for significant legal fees. Probably both. I accepted the 10 o'clock appointment and spent the next hour preparing comprehensive documentation of everything I had discovered over the weekend. I arrived at Morrison & Associates offices in downtown Denver at 9:45, allowing myself time to compose my thoughts before the consultation. The office occupied the 15th floor of a modern building with views of the mountains to the west, decorated in a style that balanced professional credibility with subtle warmth. The reception area contained comfortable seating and artwork that suggested success without ostentation. Catherine Morrison emerged from her office at precisely 10 o'clock, a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and an expression that radiated competent intensity. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her handshake was firm enough to communicate strength without performative aggression. Her office continued the aesthetic of professional success, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves containing legal references and framed degrees from Stanford Law School. She gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her desk and got directly to business without preliminary small talk. "I have followed your career with interest, Dr. Whitfield. Your work in minimally invasive cardiac valve repair has been featured in several medical journals that cross my desk through other client cases. What happened at the gala Saturday night was unconscionable, and I want you to understand from the outset that my practice specializes in ensuring women like you are not financially penalized for the failures of their spouses." I appreciated her directness and the implicit promise that she understood the dynamics of high-achieving women married to men who benefited from their success while simultaneously resenting it. I provided her with a comprehensive summary of Saturday night's events, from Jessica's dramatic entrance through my discovery of Marcus's planning documents, watching her take notes with the practiced efficiency of someone who had heard similar stories too many times. When I finished the narrative summary, I pulled out my phone and began showing her the photographs I had taken of Marcus's financial records and planning documents. She examined each image carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates or amounts, her expression growing more satisfied as the evidence accumulated. "This is excellent documentation," she said after reviewing the final photograph. "Your husband was planning his exit strategy while actively deceiving both you and his mistress about fundamental facts. The vasectomy detail is particularly damaging to any narrative he might attempt about the affair being a momentary lapse in judgment or emotional confusion. He underwent permanent sterilization while maintaining a relationship with a woman who wanted children, which demonstrates calculated deception rather than impulsive behavior." She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching what she called the strategic framework for my divorce case. Colorado was a no-fault divorce state, which meant that proving adultery was not necessary for dissolution, but could be relevant for property division and spousal support considerations. Given that Marcus had clearly been planning his departure and had been systematically hiding assets in preparation, we would need to move aggressively to prevent him from further concealing financial resources. "The first priority is securing a temporary restraining order preventing him from accessing or disposing of any marital assets," Catherine explained. "Based on the evidence you have showing his pattern of financial deception, we can argue that there is substantial risk of asset dissipation if he is not immediately restrained. We file that today along with your petition for dissolution of marriage." She outlined a timeline that was both aggressive and strategic. Immediate filing to establish legal positions before Marcus could organize his own representation and narrative. Comprehensive discovery requests demanding complete financial disclosure, including accounts I might not know existed. Depositions of relevant witnesses who could testify to the timeline and nature of his affair. Potential forensic accounting if his financial records suggested hidden assets or income streams. What about spousal support, I asked, already knowing the answer would not be favorable but needing to hear it stated explicitly. He worked throughout our marriage, but his income from the venture capital firm was always lower than mine. Will I be required to pay him support despite his infidelity? Catherine's expression suggested she had delivered this particular piece of bad news many times to successful women. Colorado law looks at income disparity and standard of living during the marriage when determining spousal support. Your surgical income is substantially higher than his venture capital salary, and you maintained a lifestyle that both of you enjoyed based primarily on your earnings. Unless we can demonstrate that he has hidden income or assets that would equalize the financial situation, yes, you will likely face some spousal support obligation. The injustice of potentially paying support to someone who had systematically betrayed me while planning to abandon our marriage created a surge of anger that I forced into cold determination. How do we minimize that obligation or ensure it is as brief as possible? We demonstrate his employability and earning potential. We argue that the marriage duration does not justify long-term support, and we leverage his misconduct to argue for deviation from standard guidelines. The affair itself is not grounds for denying support in Colorado, but the financial deception and planning documents you discovered can support arguments that he does not come to this divorce with clean hands and should not benefit from inequitable conduct. She continued outlining the financial landscape of my divorce with the kind of detailed analysis that demonstrated extensive experience with high-earning professional women. My retirement accounts would likely be subject to division despite being primarily funded by my income. The house we purchased together would need to be valued and either sold with proceeds divided or bought out by one party. His investment in my career, such as emotional support during residency or household management that allowed me to focus on surgical training, might be used to argue for greater asset division in his favor. Each point she raised felt like another cut. Another way that Marcus would benefit financially from a marriage he had been actively destroying, while I worked late nights at the hospital saving lives and advancing my field. The realization that divorce law would reward him for my success, while his betrayal went essentially unpunished from a financial standpoint, created a bitter understanding of how thoroughly the system failed to account for moral culpability. However, Catherine continued with an expression that suggested she was about to deliver better news. We also have significant leverage. The public nature of the Gala confrontation means Marcus faces reputational damage in Denver's professional community. His venture capital firm depends on relationships with medical institutions and pharmaceutical companies, many of which were represented at that gala. The investors who witnessed his pregnant mistress announcing his infidelity, and then learned he had lied to her about his fertility, are not likely to trust his judgment or integrity in business contexts. She pulled up something on her computer and turned the screen toward me. It displayed a social media post from one of Denver's prominent healthcare investors who had attended the gala, discussing the importance of personal integrity in professional partnerships, and making thinly veiled references to Saturday night's events without naming Marcus directly. The comments section contained dozens of responses from people in Denver's medical and investment communities, many expressing shock and disappointment in language that clearly referred to Marcus, even without explicit identification. Your husband's professional reputation is currently in free fall, Catherine observed with satisfaction. That gives us negotiating leverage he probably has not fully appreciated yet. We can offer him a relatively quick and quiet divorce settlement in exchange for favorable financial terms, or we can proceed with aggressive litigation that keeps the details of his deception in public view for months or years. Most men in his position choose the former option once they understand the latter's professional costs. I appreciated her strategic thinking and the recognition that Marcus's vulnerability extended beyond legal liability into professional reputation. However, something in her framing bothered me, a suggestion that my goal should be extracting the best possible financial settlement through threat of continued exposure rather than pursuing actual justice for systematic betrayal. I understand the strategic value of leveraging his reputation damage, I said carefully. But I want to be clear about my priorities here. I am not interested in a quick settlement that allows him to escape accountability in exchange for slightly better financial terms. I want comprehensive discovery that exposes the full extent of his deception. I want depositions that force him to answer questions under oath about his planning and lies. I want a legal process that creates a permanent record of what he did, not just to me but to Jessica as well. Catherine studied me for a moment, her expression shifting into something that might have been approval. That approach will cost more in legal fees and take substantially longer than a negotiated settlement. It will also keep you engaged with the details of his betrayal for an extended period, rather than allowing you to move forward with your life. Are you certain that is the outcome you want? I thought about Marcus's future plans folder with its clinical calculation of abandonment costs. I thought about Jessica believing promises that were never going to be kept while Marcus decorated a nursery for a child he knew could not be his. I thought about the 11 years I had invested in a marriage that was apparently performance rather than partnership. And I thought about my acceptance speech Saturday night, about claiming professional achievement independent of personal relationship, about refusing to let betrayal define my worth. I am certain, I told Catherine with absolute conviction. I did not spend 14 years becoming an exceptional surgeon by taking the easy path when the right path was more difficult. I am not going to approach my divorce any differently. I want the truth documented comprehensively, regardless of how long it takes or what it costs. She nodded slowly, and I saw her begin taking notes with renewed focus. Then we proceed with full litigation strategy. Aggressive discovery, comprehensive depositions, forensic accounting if necessary, and no settlement discussions until we have complete financial transparency and sworn testimony about the timeline and nature of his deception. The consultation continued for another 90 minutes, covering every aspect of divorce strategy from temporary orders through final decree. Catherine explained the court processes, the likely timeline of 18 months to 2 years for a contested high-asset divorce, the various pressure points where settlement negotiations typically occurred, and the realistic range of outcomes I could expect regarding asset division and spousal support. By the time I left her office at noon, I had signed a representation agreement and authorized an initial retainer of $25,000 that would cover the first phase of aggressive legal action. The amount represented a significant portion of my liquid savings, but I viewed it as an investment in ensuring Marcus did not benefit financially from systematic betrayal, while facing minimal consequences for his actions. I returned to the hospital for afternoon patient consultations, finding strange comfort in the familiar routines of reviewing charts and explaining surgical options to people facing cardiac procedures. Medicine provided clear frameworks, evidence-based decisions, outcomes that correlated with skill and knowledge, rather than the chaotic unpredictability of human relationships. In the operating room, I knew exactly what I was doing and why. In divorce court, I would be navigating systems designed by people who apparently believe that financial calculations should proceed independent of moral culpability. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the afternoon with messages from colleagues, friends, and acquaintances who had heard about the Gala confrontation through various channels. Most offered support with varying degrees of awkwardness, uncertain how to address public humiliation that everyone knew about, but nobody wanted to discuss directly. A few were more direct, offering to testify about Marcus's behavior at professional events if such testimony would be helpful, or sharing their own observations about his increasing distance from me over the past year. Dr. Sarah Brennan, my best friend who had been at the medical conference in Boston during the gala, called during my break between patients. She had returned to Denver that morning and wanted to meet immediately to provide support and hear the full story. We agreed to meet at her apartment after I finished my surgical schedule that evening. The late afternoon procedure was a routine valve replacement for a 62-year-old patient with severe aortic stenosis, the kind of surgery I had performed hundreds of times with consistent success. I found the familiar rhythm of the operating room soothing, the structured teamwork and clear objectives providing respite from the emotional chaos of divorce planning. For 3 hours I was simply Dr. Whitfield, cardiovascular surgeon whose hands were steady and whose decisions saved lives. The surgery proceeded without complications, and I left the patient in recovery with excellent vital signs and projected outcomes. I changed out of my surgical scrubs, reviewed post-operative orders with the nursing staff, and drove to Sarah's apartment in Capitol Hill, feeling the exhaustion of maintaining professional composure while internally processing catastrophic life changes. Sarah opened her door before I finished knocking, pulled me into a fierce embrace, and guided me to her couch where she had apparently prepared for extended conversation with wine, tissues, and comfort food that demonstrated she understood the magnitude of what I was facing. Her apartment was smaller than my house but felt warmer somehow, decorated with artwork from her travels and photographs of friends and family that created atmosphere of genuine connection rather than curated success. "Tell me everything," she said once we were settled with wine glasses in hand. "Start from the moment that woman walked into the gala, and do not leave out any details no matter how small or painful they seem." I walked her through the entire sequence of events, from Jessica's dramatic entrance through my discovery of Marcus's planning documents, watching Sarah's expression cycle through shock, fury, and protective fierce loyalty. She interrupted occasionally with questions or expressions of outrage, but mostly she listened with the focused attention that characterized her approach to both friendship and her work as an emergency medicine physician. When I reached the part about finding the future plans folder with its financial projections for various divorce scenarios, Sarah actually stood up and began pacing her living room with barely contained rage. "He was calculating the cost of abandoning you like it was a business investment decision while you were working night shifts saving lives and believing you had a real marriage. I want to destroy him. Tell me your attorney has a plan to absolutely destroy him. Catherine has a comprehensive litigation strategy that will expose everything through discovery and depositions. It will take potentially 2 years and cost a substantial amount in legal fees, but it will create a permanent legal record of his systematic deception. That matters more to me than getting a quick settlement that lets him escape with his reputation partially intact." Sarah stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression that mixed concern with understanding. "Alex, I support whatever approach you need to take for your own healing and sense of justice. But I need to ask whether this is about documentation and accountability, or whether part of you is hoping that exposing him will somehow undo the betrayal or make the pain less intense. Because litigation does not actually heal emotional wounds even when it provides legal vindication." Her question cut to something I had been avoiding examining too closely: the motivation beneath my insistence on comprehensive legal proceedings rather than expedient settlement. Was I pursuing justice or was I pursuing revenge? Was documentation about creating accountability, or about punishing Marcus in the only way remaining available to me? And did the distinction actually matter when the outcome would be the same regardless of underlying motivation? "I think it is about refusing to let him benefit from destroying me," I said slowly, working through my reasoning as I spoke. "He planned this systematically. He lied to both Jessica and me in profound ways. He calculated the financial cost of abandonment while maintaining performances of devotion. If I settle quickly and quietly, he faces some reputation damage but ultimately moves on with relatively minor consequences. That feels like letting him win, like agreeing that betrayal just happens and we should all be mature enough to handle it efficiently." "And what does winning look like for you in this scenario?" Sarah asked gently. "What outcome would feel like justice rather than just extended engagement with someone who does not deserve more of your time and energy?" I considered her question seriously, trying to articulate what I actually wanted beyond vague concepts of accountability and documentation. "Winning looks like Marcus facing real consequences for calculated deception. It looks like comprehensive legal records that prevent him from rewriting history or claiming the affair was a momentary mistake rather than systematic double life. It looks like financial outcomes that do not reward him for benefiting from my career while planning to abandon me. And honestly, it looks like him understanding that I am not someone who can be discarded without significant cost." Sarah sat back down beside me, her expression thoughtful. "Those are reasonable goals, and if pursuing them through aggressive litigation serves your healing process, then that is absolutely what you should do. Just promise me you will also invest energy in rebuilding your own life rather than only focusing on tearing down his. Promise me you will not let this divorce become your entire identity for the next 2 years." I promised, though I was not entirely certain I could keep that promise when divorce proceedings would inevitably dominate my non-working hours for the foreseeable future. Sarah seemed to recognize my uncertainty because she shifted the conversation toward practical support rather than psychological processing. "What do you need from me and from your other friends right now? How can we help beyond just listening to you process the emotional devastation? I need people to treat me normally rather than with constant pity." I need social activities that have nothing to do with Marcus or divorce or public humiliation. I need to remember who I am beyond being a betrayed spouse, which means focusing on my surgical work and professional identity. And honestly, I need people to stop sending me messages expressing sympathy, because each one requires me to acknowledge the situation again when I am trying to maintain functional composure. Sarah nodded and began making notes on her phone. I am organizing a text to our core friend group establishing ground rules. No mention of Marcus unless you bring it up first. No expressions of sympathy that require you to comfort us about your own situation. No gossip about what people are saying regarding the gala unless you specifically ask. Normal social activities focused on things you enjoy rather than therapeutic processing sessions disguised as friendship. The relief I felt at having someone understand what I actually needed, rather than what they assumed I needed, created the first genuine smile I had managed since Saturday night. Thank you for not trying to fix this or minimize it or tell me everything happens for a reason or any of the other useless platitudes people offer when they are uncomfortable with someone else's pain. We spent the rest of the evening discussing everything except Marcus and divorce, falling back into the comfortable friendship patterns we had established during medical school, when we supported each other through brutal residency schedules, and the particular challenges of being women in male-dominated surgical specialties. Sarah told me about a complicated trauma case she had managed in the emergency department last week. I described the technical innovations I was developing for my minimally invasive valve repair technique. We debated the merits of various restaurants we wanted to try and planned a weekend hiking trip to Rocky Mountain National Park for later in the fall. By the time I left her apartment around midnight, I felt marginally more human and less like a walking wound that everyone approached with careful sympathy. The drive home to my house in Cherry Creek felt less oppressive than it had the previous 2 nights, though walking into space that Marcus and I had shared still carried the weight of loss and betrayal. I found an envelope that had been pushed through my mail slot sometime during the day, my name written in Marcus's distinctive handwriting across the front. Inside was a 3-page letter written on his personal stationery, the expensive cream paper he used for professional correspondence that was supposed to signal sophistication and success. The letter began with accusations that I had overreacted to Saturday's events and had prevented rational discussion by changing the locks and blocking his phone number. He claimed that Jessica was mentally unstable and had created an elaborate fantasy about their relationship based on a few professional interactions and his misguided attempts to be kind to someone who was clearly troubled. He insisted that her pregnancy had nothing to do with him despite her delusions, and that my immediate belief in her accusations over his denials demonstrated fundamental lack of trust that suggested our marriage had deeper problems than one misunderstanding. The gaslighting was comprehensive and sophisticated, reframing documented infidelity as compassion misinterpreted by an unstable woman, while simultaneously suggesting that my reaction to public humiliation indicated I was the one with trust issues. He positioned himself as the reasonable party seeking mature resolution while I was being emotional and irrational by pursuing divorce rather than counseling. The second page shifted tactics toward negotiation, suggesting that we owed it to 11 years of marriage to at least attempt reconciliation before making permanent decisions based on temporary anger. He proposed couples therapy with a counselor of my choosing, a trial separation to allow emotions to settle, and his willingness to be completely transparent about his activities if I would just give him the opportunity to rebuild my trust. The final page revealed his true concerns, thinly veiled beneath therapeutic language about healing and moving forward. He was worried about financial implications of divorce, about the impact on his professional reputation, about losing the lifestyle my income had provided. He suggested that maintaining our marriage would be better for both of our careers, that divorce would create unnecessary complications and expenses, that we could find ways to be happy together if we both committed to working through this temporary difficulty. I read the letter 3 times, analyzing it with the same clinical detachment I applied to reviewing surgical literature. Marcus was attempting multiple strategies simultaneously, testing which approach might create openings for manipulation or negotiation. The gaslighting about Jessica was designed to make me question my own perceptions. The therapy suggestions were designed to delay legal proceedings, while he organized his financial position. The concerns about mutual career impact were designed to frighten me into prioritizing reputation over justice. None of it would work because I had already made my decision and established legal representation, but the letter provided valuable insight into his strategic thinking and his assessment of my vulnerabilities. He believed I could be manipulated through appeals to our shared history, through suggestions that I was being irrational, through fear of professional consequences, or through delay tactics disguised as mature conflict resolution. I photographed each page of the letter and forwarded the images to Catherine Morrison with a brief email explaining that Marcus had apparently decided to attempt direct communication despite my instruction that all contact should go through attorneys. Her response came back within 15 minutes despite the late hour, suggesting she was working evening hours on case preparation. Do not respond to this letter or any future attempts at direct communication. Forward everything to me immediately. His tactics are standard for controlling spouses facing loss of power, and every communication he sends provides evidence of his attempts to manipulate and delay. This letter will be useful in demonstrating his bad faith approach to the divorce proceedings. I filed the letter in the growing folder of documentation I was accumulating, then spent an hour reviewing the financial records I had photographed from Marcus's office. The rental agreement for Jessica's apartment showed monthly payments of $4,000 that had been coming from an account I had not known existed. Credit card statements revealed a pattern of expensive gifts and dinners that suggested he had been actively courting her throughout the 14 months of their relationship, treating the affair like a romance rather than a casual indiscretion. Most interesting were the bank transfers I had initially overlooked, regular monthly movements of money from our joint account into the account he used for Jessica's expenses. The amounts were small enough to avoid triggering my notice when I occasionally reviewed our shared finances, but over 14 months they totaled more than $60,000 of marital assets that he had systematically diverted toward maintaining his double life. I created a spreadsheet documenting every transfer, every credit card charge, every expense related to the affair that I could identify from the financial records. The exercise was both therapeutic and strategic, channeling rage into meticulous documentation that would serve legal purposes, while providing me with sense of control over, at least one aspect of the situation. By 2 a.m, I had compiled a comprehensive financial analysis of Marcus's affair that demonstrated systematic diversion of marital assets over an extended period. The documentation would support arguments that he had been dissipating marital property, and should face consequences in asset division calculations. More importantly, it provided concrete evidence that the affair was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but rather a calculated long-term deception that involved significant financial planning and investment. I finally allowed myself to sleep around 3, setting my alarm for 6 to allow enough time for morning workout before heading to the hospital for a full surgical schedule. Sleep came easier than the previous nights, perhaps because I had spent the evening building strategic responses rather than simply processing emotional devastation. Action, even action that consisted primarily of documentation and legal planning, felt better than passive grief. The next morning brought news that would transform my divorce from personal catastrophe into something with broader implications. I was reviewing preoperative charts when Dr. Morrison knocked on my office door, with an expression that suggested significant developments. "Have you seen this morning's Denver Business Journal?" she asked, holding up her tablet displaying the publication's homepage. The headline read Apex Biotech Partner under investigation for financial irregularities, with a photograph of Marcus that appeared to have been taken at a professional conference. I took the tablet and read the article with growing satisfaction. Someone, possibly one of the investors who had witnessed Saturday's Gala confrontation, had apparently initiated an internal review of Marcus's expense reports and client account management at Apex Biotech. The review had discovered irregularities suggesting personal use of client entertainment budgets, questionable expense reimbursements, and possible conflicts of interest in deal evaluations. The article quoted Apex Biotech's managing director confirming that Marcus Whitfield had been placed on administrative leave pending completion of the investigation, and that the firm took any allegations of financial impropriety extremely seriously given their fiduciary responsibilities to investors and partners. While the article did not directly mention the Gala confrontation or his affair, the timing made the connection obvious to anyone familiar with recent events. I handed the tablet back to Dr. Morrison, feeling something that was not quite satisfaction but perhaps recognition that consequences were beginning to accumulate beyond what I could impose through divorce proceedings alone. "His professional reputation is collapsing faster than I anticipated," The investors who witnessed his pregnant mistress announcing his infidelity apparently decided they could not trust his judgment in business contexts either. Dr. Morrison sat down across from my desk, her expression serious. This changes the landscape of your divorce significantly. If he loses his position at Apex Biotech or faces professional sanctions, his earning capacity diminishes substantially, which affects spousal support calculations and his ability to maintain legal representation through extended proceedings. Your attorney should know about this development immediately. I sent the article link to Catherine Morrison before my first surgery of the day, along with a brief note asking how Marcus's professional difficulties might impact our legal strategy. Her response came during my lunch break, outlining both opportunities and complications created by his employment problems. His reduced income helps minimize potential spousal support obligations, but it also means he may have less capacity to pay litigation costs, which could paradoxically extend proceedings if he drags out discovery to delay expenses. We should continue aggressive strategy, but be prepared for him to become more desperate as his professional options narrow. Desperate people make both mistakes and unpredictable choices, so maintain all security precautions and document any attempts at contact or intimidation. The afternoon brought my first direct contact with Marcus since the Gala confrontation, though it came through his newly retained attorney rather than personal communication. The letter from Sullivan & Partners, a family law firm known for representing high-net-worth men in contentious divorces, arrived at Catherine Morrison's office via courier and was immediately forwarded to me electronically. The letter was professionally aggressive, denying all allegations of financial impropriety and characterizing my divorce petition as retaliatory action based on misunderstandings and false accusations. It demanded that I cease making defamatory statements about Marcus to professional contacts or media outlets, threatened to seek sanctions for any attempts to damage his reputation, and proposed immediate mediation to resolve property division without extended litigation. Catherine's response to his attorney was equally aggressive, providing detailed documentation of the affair expenses I had compiled and noting that truth was absolute defense against defamation claims. She rejected mediation as premature until complete financial discovery was provided and indicated that we would be pursuing forensic accounting, given the pattern of hidden accounts and diverted assets. The opening salvos of legal warfare had been fired, and I felt strangely calm about the battles ahead. Marcus had underestimated my capacity for strategic response, had assumed I would be too devastated or too focused on professional responsibilities to mount comprehensive legal challenge to his preferred narrative. He was learning that the same dedication and attention to detail that made me an exceptional surgeon would be applied to documenting his deception and ensuring he faced meaningful consequences. I was Dr. Alexandra Whitfield, and I was done being underestimated by anyone, especially by someone who had promised to stand beside me for life, then calculated the cost of abandoning that promise while I slept beside him believing our partnership was real. The fight ahead would be long and expensive and emotionally exhausting, but it would also be thorough, strategic, and ultimately successful in ways that Marcus clearly had not anticipated when he planned his dramatic exit. And that certainty, cold and clear and absolutely unshakable, would sustain me through whatever came next. The first 2 weeks following my divorce filing established patterns that would characterize the coming months of legal proceedings. My days developed a dual rhythm, oscillating between the familiar demands of surgical practice and the unfamiliar territory of aggressive divorce litigation. Mornings typically began at 5:30 with review of patient charts and surgical schedules, the clinical work providing structure and purpose that existed independent of personal catastrophe. Evenings shifted to conference calls with Catherine Morrison, document review sessions that stretched past midnight, and the meticulous organization of evidence that would support our comprehensive approach to financial discovery. Catherine had moved quickly on multiple fronts immediately following our initial consultation. Within 48 hours of my signing the representation agreement, she had filed both my petition for dissolution of marriage and a motion for temporary orders that would govern our separation period. The temporary orders requested exclusive occupancy of the marital home, immediate freezing of all joint accounts pending equitable division, and preliminary injunctions preventing Marcus from disposing of assets or incurring additional debt that might affect my financial interests. The motion included extensive exhibits documenting Marcus's pattern of financial deception, From the apartment rental agreement for Jessica through the detailed expense records showing systematic diversion of marital funds. Catherine had organized the evidence with surgical precision, creating a narrative through financial documents that demonstrated calculated long-term planning, rather than impulsive infidelity. Each bank transfer, each credit card charge, each hidden account became another data point in a pattern that suggested someone who had been methodically constructing an exit strategy while maintaining elaborate performances of marital commitment. Marcus's attorney, David Sullivan from Sullivan & Partners, had responded with predictable aggression. His countermotion disputed virtually every factual allegation, characterized my evidence as misinterpretation of legitimate business expenses and personal financial management, and argued that I was engaged in vindictive litigation designed to punish Marcus for the natural dissolution of an unhappy marriage, rather than seeking equitable resolution. The legal writing was sophisticated and professional, but it could not overcome the fundamental problem that Marcus's own documentation contradicted the innocent narrative his attorney was attempting to construct. The hearing for temporary orders was scheduled for 3 weeks after filing, providing limited time for both sides to marshal evidence and prepare arguments. Catherine spent those 3 weeks building what she called the foundational narrative, the story we would tell consistently throughout all proceedings about who Marcus was and what he had done. The narrative centered on systematic deception, financial manipulation, and calculated betrayal, using his own planning documents and expense records to demonstrate that his affair was not emotional weakness but rather strategic positioning for a future he had been constructing while lying to everyone in his life. I spent those same 3 weeks maintaining surgical schedules that felt increasingly like sanctuary from the chaos of divorce proceedings. The operating room remained the one space where my expertise was unquestioned, where outcomes correlated with skill rather than legal maneuvering, where I could focus entirely on the technical challenges of repairing damaged hearts without metaphorical implications. My surgical performance remained excellent despite emotional turmoil, perhaps because the discipline required to maintain steady hands during complex procedures created mental compartmentalization that served me well in other contexts. The professional response to my situation evolved during those weeks in ways that revealed much about institutional dynamics and gender politics in medical environments. Some colleagues treated me with careful sympathy, lowering their voices when discussing my cases as though personal catastrophe required gentle handling even in professional contexts. Others maintained deliberately normal interactions, seeming to understand that I needed consistency rather than special treatment. A few, mostly older male physicians, adopted subtly disapproving tones when discussing my divorce, as though marital failure reflected poorly on my professional judgment or suggested emotional instability that might affect surgical competence. Dr. Patricia Morrison remained consistently supportive while refusing to treat me as fragile. She assigned me complex cases that demanded full attention, included me in departmental planning meetings where strategic decisions required clear thinking, and generally communicated through her actions that she viewed me as the same excellent surgeon I had been before my marriage imploded. Her approach felt respectful in ways that excessive sympathy did not, acknowledging that personal crisis and professional capability could coexist without one diminishing the other. The temporary orders hearing took place on a Wednesday morning in late November, requiring me to adjust my surgical schedule to accommodate courthouse appearances that would become increasingly familiar over the coming months. I arrived at the courthouse 45 minutes early, wearing a conservative navy suit that Catherine had suggested would project appropriate professional credibility without seeming overly formal. The building itself was modern and efficient, with security screening and crowded hallways suggesting the volume of legal disputes being processed through family court on any given day. Catherine met me in the hallway outside the courtroom assigned to our case, carrying a leather briefcase that presumably contained the extensive documentation we had prepared. She reviewed key points we had discussed during preparation sessions, reminding me to answer questions directly without elaborating unnecessarily, to maintain composed demeanor regardless of what Marcus's attorney might argue, and to remember that temporary orders represented only the first phase of what would be extended legal engagement. Marcus arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled hearing time, accompanied by David Sullivan and appearing significantly less polished than I had ever seen him. He wore an expensive suit that hung slightly loose, suggesting recent weight loss, and his face showed signs of inadequate sleep and considerable stress. Our eyes met briefly across the courthouse hallway before he looked away, unable or unwilling to maintain contact that might require acknowledgement of what he had done. The courtroom was smaller than I had anticipated from television dramas, with simple furniture and institutional decoration that emphasized function over atmosphere. Judge Rebecca Martinez presided, a woman in her late 50s whose reputation according to Catherine included no-nonsense efficiency and limited patience for unnecessary drama. She reviewed the case file briefly before addressing both attorneys with directness that suggested she had already formed preliminary assessments based on written submissions. The hearing proceeded with each attorney presenting arguments for their proposed temporary orders, supported by selected evidence from the comprehensive documentation both sides had submitted. Catherine methodically walked through Marcus's financial deception, using his own planning documents to demonstrate systematic preparation for divorce that contradicted his attorney's characterization of sudden marital breakdown. She highlighted the apartment rental beginning 8 months before the Gala confrontation, the pattern of diverted funds totaling more than $60,000, and the spreadsheet calculations of divorce costs that proved premeditation rather than impulsive reaction to marital difficulties. David Sullivan attempted to reframe the same evidence as responsible financial planning by someone who recognized that the marriage was deteriorating and wanted to understand potential implications. He argued that maintaining a separate apartment was Marcus's way of creating space for reflection rather than evidence of affair, that the financial transfers represented legitimate personal expenses rather than asset dissipation, and that planning for potential divorce showed prudence rather than deception. The arguments were professionally constructed, but fundamentally unconvincing, when confronted with the detailed timeline of Marcus's relationship with Jessica. Judge Martinez asked pointed questions about the vasectomy, about Marcus's communications with Jessica regarding the pregnancy, and about the Gala confrontation that had made the situation publicly known. Her question suggested skepticism about Marcus's innocent explanations and recognition that the medical evidence regarding his sterility created serious credibility problems for any narrative suggesting the affair was less calculated than it appeared. The testimony portion of the hearing required both Marcus and me to take the stand for questioning about specific factual matters relevant to temporary orders. I testified first, answering Catherine's questions about discovering the affair, about finding Marcus's planning documents, about the timeline of financial deception as documented through bank records and credit card statements. I maintained composed professional demeanor throughout, treating the testimony as though I were presenting medical case information rather than describing personal betrayal. David Sullivan's cross-examination attempted to suggest that I had been inattentive to my marriage due to surgical career demands, that Marcus's distance had developed over years rather than coinciding with the affair, and that my current anger was coloring my interpretation of evidence that might have innocent explanations. The questions were designed to plant doubt about my credibility, and to suggest that marital breakdown was mutual failure rather than Marcus's unilateral deception. I answered each question directly and without defensiveness, refusing to accept the premises that my professional dedication justified infidelity, or that systematic financial deception could be explained as misunderstanding. Catherine had prepared me well for cross-examination tactics, and I recognized the strategic purpose behind questions that seemed designed to provoke emotional responses rather than elicit useful information. Marcus's testimony revealed the fundamental weakness of his position. Under oath and subject to perjury consequences, he could not maintain the complete denial his attorney preferred without contradicting documented evidence. He admitted to the relationship with Jessica while characterizing it as emotional affair rather than physical involvement, admitted to renting the apartment while suggesting it was for personal reflection rather than cohabitation, and admitted to the financial planning documents while claiming they represented hypothetical scenarios rather than actual preparation. Catherine's cross-examination systematically demolished each qualification and rationalization. She walked Marcus through specific text messages with Jessica discussing their future together, through credit card charges for furniture delivered to the apartment he claimed was for solitary reflection, through the detailed financial projections that included specific dollar amounts and timeline assumptions far too precise to be hypothetical exercises. Each answer he provided created additional credibility problems, and Judge Martinez's expression suggested she was forming conclusions that would not favor his requests. The hearing concluded after approximately 3 hours of arguments and testimony. Judge Martinez indicated she would issue written orders within 1 week, addressing the various requests both parties had made. Her preliminary comments from the bench suggested that she found credible evidence of financial deception that warranted protective measures, though she declined to make definitive statements before reviewing all testimony and considering legal standards that govern temporary orders. Catherine and I left the courthouse together, walking several blocks to a coffee shop where we could debrief without risk of encountering Marcus or his attorney. She ordered elaborate caffeine-laden drinks for both of us and settled into a corner booth with the satisfied expression of someone who believed the hearing had proceeded favorably. "You did extremely well on the stand," she told me once we were situated with our drinks. "You answered questions directly without getting defensive or emotional. You did not take Sullivan's bait when he tried to suggest your career was responsible for marital problems, and you came across as credible and consistent." Marcus, on the other hand, appeared evasive and inconsistent in ways that will damage his credibility moving forward. What happens next while we wait for the judge's order? We continue with discovery requests. I am serving comprehensive interrogatories and document demands tomorrow that will require Marcus to provide detailed financial information under oath. We are also scheduling his deposition for early January, which will give us opportunity to question him extensively about the affair timeline, the financial planning, and any other areas where we believe he has been less than truthful. The temporary orders will govern your separation in the meantime, but the real work of building your divorce case continues regardless of what Judge Martinez decides. The written order arrived 6 days later, delivered electronically through the court's filing system. Judge Martinez had granted virtually all of our requests, while rejecting most of Marcus's counterproposals. I was awarded exclusive occupancy of the marital home pending final property division. All joint accounts were frozen with neither party permitted to make withdrawals without court approval or mutual written consent. Marcus was enjoined from disposing of any assets or incurring debt that might affect marital property. Preliminary temporary support was set at a modest amount pending complete financial discovery, far less than Marcus had requested and structured to terminate automatically if he secured comparable employment. Most significantly, the order included detailed findings that demonstrated Judge Martinez's assessment of credibility and conduct. She specifically noted that Marcus's testimony had been evasive and contradicted by documentary evidence, that his financial planning documents suggested premeditation inconsistent with his claimed timeline, and that the pattern of hidden accounts and diverted funds created substantial concern about potential asset dissipation. The findings would establish baseline credibility assessments that would likely influence future judicial decisions throughout the divorce proceedings. Catherine called within an hour of the order being filed to share her satisfaction with the outcome. This is about as favorable as temporary orders get in contested divorces. The judge essentially called Marcus a liar in written findings that will be part of the permanent record. His attorney will have difficulty arguing for credibility in future proceedings when the first judge to evaluate evidence found him fundamentally unreliable. Does this change our strategy going forward, or do we continue with the aggressive discovery approach we discussed? We absolutely continue aggressive discovery. These orders give a strong foundation, but we still need comprehensive financial information to ensure he has not hidden additional assets and to establish complete picture of marital property. The interrogatories and document demands go out tomorrow as planned, his deposition gets scheduled for January, and we proceed with forensic accounting if his responses suggest any irregularities. The interrogatories Catherine served were extensive, comprising 47 separate questions that demanded detailed information about every aspect of Marcus's financial life. They required him to identify all bank accounts, investment accounts, retirement funds, and other financial assets he had held during the marriage. They demanded complete employment history including compensation details and benefits. They asked for comprehensive information about the affair with Jessica including timeline, expenses, and communications. They required disclosure of any gifts, loans, or financial transfers to third parties during the previous 3 years. Each interrogatory was carefully crafted to close potential loopholes or evasive answers. Rather than asking generally about bank accounts, Catherine specified accounts held individually or jointly, accounts in his name or under his control, accounts containing marital funds or separate property, and accounts at any financial institution regardless of current balance. The precision was designed to eliminate his ability to claim he misunderstood questions, or to provide technically accurate but incomplete responses. The document demands were equally comprehensive, requesting production of tax returns, bank statements, credit card statements, employment records, communications with Jessica, financial planning documents, and essentially every piece of paper or electronic record that might shed light on his financial situation or the affair timeline. Catherine had explained that comprehensive initial demands were strategic, forcing Marcus to either comply extensively or file objections that would require judicial resolution and create additional opportunities to demonstrate his resistance to transparency. Marcus's responses, due 30 days after service, would determine whether discovery proceeded cooperatively or became extended battle requiring court intervention. Catherine predicted that David Sullivan would object to many requests as overly broad or unduly burdensome, which would necessitate meet and confer negotiations and potentially motion practice to compel compliance. The discovery phase of contentious divorces often consumed months of attorney time and generated substantial legal fees, but it was essential for ensuring complete financial transparency and preventing hidden assets from escaping equitable division. While discovery demands were pending, Catherine also began scheduling depositions of potential witnesses who could provide information relevant to property division or spousal support determinations. Jessica was high on the list, both because her testimony could establish a fair timeline and because her communications with Marcus might reveal financial information he had not disclosed. Several of Marcus's colleagues at Apex Biotech were also identified as potential deponents who could testify about his employment status, compensation, and the circumstances of his administrative leave. My own life during this discovery phase developed strange dual quality. My professional work continued with normal intensity, including complex surgical cases that demanded complete focus and departmental responsibilities that required strategic planning. I presented my minimally invasive valve repair technique at a regional cardiology conference in early December, receiving positive reception from colleagues who either did not know about my personal situation or had the grace not to mention it in professional contexts. I continued publishing research, mentoring surgical residents, and serving on hospital committees that shaped cardiac care protocols. Simultaneously, my evenings and weekends became consumed with divorce preparation. I spent hours reviewing financial documents, preparing for my own deposition that Catherine scheduled for late January, and organizing evidence that would support our case for equitable property division and minimal spousal support obligations. The work was tedious and emotionally exhausting, requiring me to examine in detail the financial architecture of a marriage I had believed was partnership but was apparently performance. The emotional processing happened in fragments between professional demands and legal preparation. I would find myself crying unexpectedly while driving home from the hospital, grief ambushing me when I was too tired to maintain composed facade. I struggled with sleep, my mind racing through legal strategies or replaying moments from my marriage that now seemed like evidence I should have recognized as Marcus distancing himself while planning his exit. I lost weight without intending to, my appetite diminished by stress, and the constant low-level anxiety that accompanied knowing I was engaged in extended conflict with someone who had once promised to protect me. Dr. Sarah Brennan remained my primary emotional support, checking in daily through text messages and insisting on regular dinners where we maintained the agreement not to discuss Marcus unless I raised the topic. She dragged me to yoga classes that I initially resented, but eventually appreciated for the forced physical activity and mental quieting. She organized a weekend trip to a mountain cabin with several close friends from medical school, creating space away from Denver where I could exist without constant reminders of professional gossip or legal proceedings. The medical community's response to my situation continued revealing uncomfortable truths about institutional dynamics and gender politics. Some colleagues expressed admiration for how I was handling the situation, noting my maintained surgical excellence and professional composure as evidence of strength. Others seemed uncomfortable with my unwillingness to quickly move past the betrayal, suggesting through subtle comments that extended divorce litigation seemed vindictive, or that I should consider whether my career demands had contributed to marital breakdown. The gender dimension was impossible to ignore. Male physicians who experienced divorces were typically met with sympathy and minimal professional scrutiny, regardless of circumstances. Female physicians, particularly those who maintained aggressive litigation strategies rather than seeking quick settlements, faced implicit questions about whether their approach demonstrated emotional instability or inability to handle personal matters maturely. The double standard was infuriating but also motivating, reinforcing my determination to pursue comprehensive legal accountability, regardless of whether that approach met gendered expectations about how women should handle betrayal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.